Hey, everyone. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, the Boston Celtics have entered the Kevin Durant sweepstakes. What does that mean for the Lakers and Kyrie Irving? That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how you get your podcast, no matter where you get your podcasts, always free, never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to get the podcast a little bit early, particularly on non-game nights. Subscribe there and you will be first, Andy, in line for all the breaking news, all the analysis as we post it there. We'll try to get to this Austin Reeves stuff, which we're hope to talk about on Monday. We've got some information regarding the summit call between Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis, and LeBron James, which could change the way you look at some of the things that have happened since then. So we'll do that. But Andy,
or it might not. There's also a chance it might not.
I said could. I said didn't say does. I said could.
Yeah, I know.
But let's start.
I'm offering the other side of could. It may not.
And also, even if it does, doesn't mean it lasts forever.
Nope.
Let's start here. Bombshell stuff on Monday, as it was reported by Shams over at the Athletic that the Boston Celtics have entered hardcore the Kevin Durant sweepstakes, offering up Derek White and Jaylen Brown as part of a deal that would bring KD to Boston. The Nets obviously said no for now, have asked for Marcus Smart and maybe some other stuff, but it's enough, Andy, that the Celtics have jumped to minus 200 on the Bet Online. Where is Kevin Durant going to end up? Big board. So it is the Celtics up there at the top, followed by the Warriors, the Heat, who had been seen as a potential destination, starting to fall down. That the Lakers, for reasons I still love. Plus, they're 18-1. Just because the Lakers are always going to be on a board like this. But Boston is now heavy favorites and have already offered up Jaylen Brown, who clearly didn't like it, responded on Twitter with just an SMH, shaking my head. This has big implications for the Lakers and what eventually happens to Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, reading from Shams' report, quote, as of right now, the Celtics have emerged as a serious possibility as a landing spot for Durant. They have tremendous interest in bringing him in, view him as a piece that could take him over that final hurdle. Obviously, they were in the finals last year, lost to the Warriors. Although there is work to be done, there is a deal that to be had that would suffice the Nets' overwhelming ask. Adrian Wojnarowski always reporting on this. Quote, there are no deals believed to have traction for Durant, and no team has yet to reach the significant threshold that the Nets have set to trade one of the league's most talented players. Sources said the Nets' posture on the potential trade has largely unchanged. They want a massive return, including multiple unprotected first-round picks, pick swaps, and impactful players. And what's interesting about that is that, it speaks to just the overall demand and what your team needs to have in order to get in business. You know, there's already reports, I believe from Shams, but that Phoenix, who at one point was considered the front runner for this, is basically now out of the sweepstakes.
Right, they can't trade DeAndre Ayton.
Right.
So who would have been a centerpiece of that? Now that he's re-signed and with Phoenix, they can't trade him.
Right, and Devin Booker, Chris Paul, they're obviously non-starters, and Mikal Bridges is a really good player, but he's not good enough to be that centerpiece. The Celtics consider Jason Tatum off limits, but Jaylen Brown, if he's not as good as Jason Tatum, the gap is pretty damn small. Jaylen Brown is pretty close, I think, to Jason Tatum.
I don't think I think there's a gap between those guys, but I also think I heard a couple commentators talking about Jaylen Brown isn't the guy you make the centerpiece of a championship team. Okay, but he is right at that level of a great number two, and Brooklyn isn't Indiana, Brooklyn isn't Sacramento, Brooklyn isn't Orlando. If you're short, if you have Ben Simmons and Jaylen Brown and a good supporting cast, all you're short is that one star to sign and push you over the top and make you a high-end contender, you can do that. You can find that guy to come play in Brooklyn. It's Lakers fans are sitting here, and on the one hand, a trade with Boston, which would make the Celtics the favorite to win the title. Probably, I think you pair Tatum and Kevin Durant with the rest of that supporting cast, would still be really good, even if they traded both Smart and Jaylen Brown to Brooklyn. So the Celtics become the overwhelming title favorite, but it makes it easier for the Lakers to acquire Kyrie Irving and, in theory, upgrade their talent. So Lakers fans, maybe we're going to get to that in a second.
We're going to get to that. Maybe.
So on the one hand,
I actually agree with that, but
right.
Continue forward.
Maybe. So it's an interesting place for the Lakers to be in, where you're kind of rooting for the Celtics to make a trade that makes them better.
Well, it's apparently not that interesting, Brian, because in terms of it being a dilemma, I think it's a really interesting scenario. But I put out a poll on Twitter at Cam Brothers. Laker fans, do you want Kyrie badly enough that you're cool with the Celtics getting Durant in the process? And a little over 800 votes so far, but 70% are saying yes. So it's pretty overwhelming that Lakers fans are cool with the prospect of the Celtics getting an undisputed top 5 player in the league, if he is healthy, on a team that has already shown themselves able to go on a deep playoff run.
Yes. Finals caliber.
Come within a couple wins of winning the championship. If that means they get Kyrie, who, may still be the preferred trade target for Laker fans. But
we'll get to that in a second, whether or not Kyrie is, a better option, really, when it's all said and done. Is Kyrie plus something else they could get from Brooklyn better as an option than, a Myles Turner, Buddy Hield type deal? In both situations, the Lakers probably will end up having to give up both first-round picks. In both situations, other things might have to go, whether it's THT or something like that. There are a lot of different combinations, but it's not like Boston. Everybody knows what the Lakers have to offer. It's not much. It'll either get the job done or it won't. But we'll save that for the next segment. You made the point, and I think you're right, that the news clarity helps the Lakers, because it's better to know what is an option than what isn't.
If this really happens with Boston and Durant.
Right. It's just better to know, because then you get an answer. When is Kyrie going to be available? Is Kyrie going to be available? For what it's worth, Kyrie, Shams is reporting, he told the Pat McAfee show on Monday that Kyrie has every intention and wants to finish out his contract playing for Brooklyn. Okay, that wouldn't preclude Brooklyn from trading him, but whatever.
No, but it might speak to his actual mindset about being there, which I do think matters.
If it means if KD is traded, he's not going to instantly demand a trade, which is relevant.
Or just like the idea of, hey, I'm in the mood to play basketball for Brooklyn this season.
Today.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, I think this stuff, I'm not saying it is a deal breaker in terms of Brooklyn wanting to commit long-term with Kyrie, or even changing dramatically their perception of Kyrie. I'm just saying, when it comes to Kyrie, mood is everything.
It is. It also, there's a potential for damage control here, because this is the first situation in a long time where Kyrie isn't in the center of the team wrecking, team shifting, team altering controversy. He can just sit back and let Brooklyn trade him if that's what they want to do, without making demands that make him look worse in the market than he already does. But the big question becomes, how does, let's say, based on Shams reporting, it's Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown are the sort of the price of entry plus whatever first round picks and whatever.
And then maybe another rotation player.
Maybe another rotation player, whatever. But two big pieces. Even if you don't think Brown is as good as Tatum, you're closer you're closer on it than I am. I think there's a little bit of a gap, but you're still talking about an elite level player plus the defensive player of the year. This creates a really interesting scenario about the availability of Kyrie Irving after that kind of trade and whether or not the Lakers would be able to acquire him. And we will get to that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar Puffs, they are sweeping the nation. And of course, as always, there is a new flavor. You ready? Cookie dough chunk puffs. They've got a light, chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks. And as always, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. It is all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs, only 160 calories, but a whopping 15 grams of protein. The good protein, the collagen protein that your body absorbs more efficiently. It's got tons of health benefits. So order a box for you and the family. It's a perfect treat. Or you know what? Order a box for yourself and hide them, hoard them. Let your family fend for themselves. Like, what have they done for you lately? Either way, ditch the calories, the fat, and the sugar. Go to built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCK15, 15% off at built.com.
Okay, so Andy, the idea is that a trade of Kevin Durant would put the Brooklyn Nets into a rebuilding mode. It would, make it virtually impossible for them to win anything in the Eastern Conference. They would tear it all down, and that would make them much more amenable to ship Kyrie Irving off to the Lakers, perhaps with some extra stuff and all that for Russell Westbrook and whatever else is required. If they end up as this, rumored deal, what starts with Jaylen Brown, could include Marcus Smart when it's all said and done, perhaps another rotation player and a couple draft picks after that, which would give Brooklyn, with what they got from the Ben Simmons deal, 3 or 4 picks that they could work with to continue to try to improve the team. If that's what they end up getting back, that's a competitive team in the Eastern Conference. They've got some depth on that team. They've got some decent young players. It does throw into question as to whether or not Brooklyn would be rebuilding enough that they would find it appealing to trade Kyrie for essentially a couple extra draft picks.
Well, I mean, there's always been that question because the reported demands for Brooklyn has always been the idea of wanting a really good young player that they could continue building around, plus supplementary young players, picks, all that sort of stuff. So in certain respects, I don't even know how much they were looking to rebuild as much as maybe take a slight step backwards. But either way, if you're talking about bringing in Jaylen Brown, maybe Marcus Smart, Derek White, players of that caliber, alongside Ben Simmons, TJ Warren, Patty Mills, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, like what I find fascinating about this, Brian, is it could give Brooklyn enough security to, say, trade Kyrie Irving for no competitive players in return, in the case of the Lakers, picks and a wave.
Russell Westbrook slander. Hey now.
Picks and a waived Russell Westbrook. And they feel like they are in a place where they can be competitive doing that. Or it could just change the calculus of what they want in a Kyrie deal at all, which could make things very difficult for the Lakers. It could also, Brian,
right, like in the sense that they would decide, okay, we're still willing to trade Kyrie, but we don't want to trade him. We want to trade him at the very least for players who will help us this year, as opposed to Russell Westbrook.
Yes, exactly. Well, yes, Russell Westbrook falls into the, I believe from Brooklyn's perspective and seemingly from most teams around the league, he does not help you right now at all to win at a high level. If you consider that disrespectful to Russ, whatever.
I mean, Russell Westbrook and Ben Simmons sharing the same court is that.
No,
from a shooting perspective, that's that.
Well, just from a lot of perspectives, it makes no sense. And that is the perception of Russ. But it could also, Brian, give the Nets maybe a perspective that they want to keep Kyrie. Like you had mentioned before, Brian, that Kyrie had reiterated the idea that he opted into his deal to stay with Brooklyn, play out his deal. He's not looking to get traded. Jaylen Brown, for example, recently, it was right before the first round playoff match between Boston and Brooklyn, said that he and Kyrie did not get along well as teammates in Boston a few seasons ago, but they've since patched things up and they actually have a really good friendship at this point. He said, quote, Kyrie is somebody that I've connected with, somebody they call a friend, a brother, somebody that calls me to pick my brain at this point. It wasn't like that when we played together. We bumped heads a lot, but it's funny now in hindsight. Kyrie talks to me, hits me up all the time, and our relationship has grown a lot since. And the Nets may also recognize, like, look, people call Kyrie eccentric. I think he's really more of just a flake, an attention seeker, but whatever. And you can question his commitment, as I do, to basketball as a full-time gig, but he clearly cares about the money. Otherwise, he'd be a Laker on a taxpayer mid-level. And he's lit a lot of money on fire over the last year and change. Assuming he cares at all about maximizing his potential in basketball moving forward, he's going to need to have a great season as a player and a teammate. He doesn't have the luxury of effing around another year.
No, that's what I was getting at.
Brooklyn,
like these guys both, Jaylen Brown would have strong incentive to make this work. Like even if they didn't get along, the double middle finger potential for everyone, for both of these guys, Jaylen Brown being expendable and shipped off, and Kyrie Irving again showing that he is someone that you do not need to be afraid of because he'll rip your team apart. Like the peripheral incentives for these guys to make it work, to make the best out of something is really strong. Now, I've said that about Westbrook, by the way. The difference is those guys are more capable of making that matter than Westbrook is. Like Russ being on his best behavior from an attitudinal standpoint, accepting the roles that Darvin Ham gives him, throwing himself headfirst into everything that might be coming, helps the Lakers. It does. It makes it better, but it doesn't make it good enough. It's not Jaylen Brown. It's not Kyrie Irving. It's not those guys pushing themselves to a place where they're kind of, in Kyrie's case, just performing like Kyrie, and in Jaylen Brown's case, ascending to that next place.
Yeah, I mean, from a Laker fan's perspective, I would actually be kind of nervous about this trade going through because of all the reported deals and like all the players linked to the Nets in these scenarios for Durant. This is the one that has made Brooklyn most immediately competitive. Like this is the one that has made them most status quo in terms of trying to be the team that by all accounts they want to be, which is why they are not looking to, forget the idea of getting equal value for Durant. They don't want to move Durant, period. They want to keep him and compete with him. But what they seem to want to do is compete. Even if they want a ton of draft picks, it's because they want a ton of draft picks, but they still want to compete.
Right. And look, if the package they end up with, even like talk about this, like the one that Toronto is resistant for around Scotty Barnes. If Scotty Barnes and a bunch of draft picks was the package, like that might turn out to be a good deal for Brooklyn. Scotty Barnes, great. I think he's going to continue to get better. But Barnes as the centerpiece of that deal is very different in terms of the calendar to when somebody like Barnes would be ready to be the centerpiece of a championship caliber team. If you want a deal, that's the kind of deal the Lakers fans would want, where the best player is a guy who's not quite ready yet. And certainly where you don't get two of those guys where, again, okay, Smart and Brown as your best players aren't necessarily going to win you anything. Although you add Ben Simmons, you can keep, maybe you keep Kyrie. Like you got a good team. But Jaylen Brown is real close and could be the guy, next guy to make that leap if given that type of responsibility. Either way, you're still too close because one more trade, one more deal or whatever. So that's not the deal that Lakers fans would want. This one with Boston, it does lead to the question of which trade would be better anyway. Like it would force the Lakers into a situation where they got to decide which is the thing that we want. Is it really Kyrie Irving and hopefully another shooter, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, whatever it might be? Again, that they would include those type of peripheral guys becomes less likely too if the team is still competitive.
Yep.
But setting that aside for a second, they got to decide, like, is Kyrie the best player in that, whether Hield and Turner versus Kyrie and whatever. Kyrie's the best player, but in terms of fit, are you looking at both sides of the ball? Myles Turner next to Anthony Davis, as we talked about on Monday's show, has the potential to be a great defensive front court, where Anthony Davis can play the 5 sort of offensively, but play the 4 defensively and have a little more freedom to do that kind of stuff in the way that he likes. You add Buddy Hield, who I don't think is as good as Joe Harris, as an example, but still would do what you need in that, you have a high volume, good shooter. There is an argument to be made, and there's a section of Lakers Twitter that is making it, that when you look at the totality of everything, Turner and Hield is actually a better deal anyway for the Lakers than Kyrie and whatever, mostly because of what it does for them defensively.
Well, I'll take that a step further. Maybe the Lakers look to expand this and they say, give us TJ McConnell. And, he's a guy that's 30. He has no place on a rebuilding Pacers team at all. He's got a team option for the 2025 season, but until then, you're taking some money off Indy's hands. And he's somebody that can help you, defensively. He's very disruptive. He's a really good backup point guard. Like, he is somebody that you can put out there to run your second unit and feel pretty good about it. And he is along that timeline of where you want to be as the Lakers right now. And he's also on a very reasonable deal if you decide that you need to move him later. And that could also be a way where you start looking at, okay, both sides of the ball, where are we giving ourselves maybe the highest floor as opposed to the highest ceiling, which I think is obviously with Kyrie.
Right. And, and just so people are, TJ McConnell is a wretched shooter. He is a terrible outside shooter. So you don't solve that problem.
That's why I did not list McConnell. Outside shooting.
No, I'm just saying, but scrappy little white fella, 6'1". I think there could be the assumption that he can shoot the 3. He cannot.
Frankly, there should be that assumption.
But he is look, whenever I would play pickup ball, people throw me the ball like as after they score, and like 5'9" white guy, I'm out there to dribble, and no, I'm not. Look, man, I'm just here to run.
Scrappy little white guys have worked very hard to build up that reputation, and it's a shame that a guy like TJ McConnell tears it down.
Yeah, but look, I think the Lakers should want to try to expand this to include as many credible rotation caliber NBA. If you're going to do this, if you're going to go all in, you have to ditch the idea and stop making the cap space for next summer so precious. You can work around that when you need to. You have to work with the idea of making this year's team as good as it possibly can be. I'm not talking about doing something really stupid, but if you have the chance to take this deal and make it so you get rotation caliber players, you have to do it, because the Lakers have a Westbrook problem, but they have a massive rotation problem. That this team's just not good enough. Even if Kendrick Nunn comes back healthy and, Lonnie Walker kind of pans out in better ways than people think, it's still not good enough. They need more good players. Austin Reeves, Andy, is a guy who played pretty well for them last year. He's a good player. He would also like a new nickname, and he wants people to help him do it. He just wants them to do better than they've been doing so far. We'll get to that. Plus the update on the big summit meeting. We'll do all of that next. So some disagreement here, Andy, as to what this potentially means, but we repeated the report. We reported no such thing. We reported that somebody else reported, Chris Haynes specifically at Yahoo, that the big 3 for the Lakers had a big conversation. This was last week, and we raised the question.
Worked with Chris Haynes to break this story.
Right. He did. I mean, admittedly, he did more work than we did.
Well, but on that end of it.
I'd like to think we contributed.
We did more work on this podcast than he did.
He hasn't done a damn
sharing
thing. I mean, nothing. But we raised the question about whether or not this came before the big freeze out at Summer League or after this phone call, because it makes a difference. And Chris was kind enough to reply to us, just sent us a note that it came after, which also, first of all, thanks for listening, Chris. And then thank you for allowing us to share this information. And the reason I point this out is happening after the freeze out makes it more likely that they are closer to being on the same, that they recognize some of the problems of what this could be going into next year, and that everybody needs to get back on the same page, and so on and so on and so on. It also lends some credence. You had Alex Regla on last week while I was on vacation, and he made the point that you can argue, at least, that the big Rich Paul tweet after Russ broke up with his agent, a lot of people interpreted that as shade towards Russ. Alex made the point that both the Rich Paul tweet about how cold this world is and LeBron's essential retweet of that could also be in support of Russ, noting that it's kind of weak sauce for Russ's agent to be putting all of his business out in public like that, very cold business in that way. At least that theory becomes much more credible knowing that they talked after the freeze out rather than before. This would be good news for the Lakers.
Yeah, look, it's certainly possible. I mean, really, at the end of the day, like we talked about before, it just depends on how the phone call went because, they could be piling on Russ, even if they think that Thad Fouché is now ex-agent was out of pocket, putting this stuff out publicly. Like both things can be happening at the same time. But it really, at the end of the day, matters how the phone call went. But either way, like you said, Brian, we very much appreciate Chris Haynes reaching out to us, clarifying that. And obviously, people who listen to this podcast knows Chris is one of the best in the business.
There is at least some reason for optimism that these guys are trying, that there's less beef, less tension. It may not matter, but that there's less tension perhaps outwardly in, getting into August than perhaps there could be. So fingers crossed from a Lakers standpoint.
Anything that could be optimistic is good.
I agree. Last thing before we go, Austin Reeves. I think this is really fascinating because Austin Reeves had two nicknames last season. The first was assigned to him really before he even got to the NBA. One of his, I believe it was a coach at Oklahoma, called him Hillbilly Kobe, which is phenomenal. And then Lakers fans kind of gave him the AR-15, Austin Reeves 15, based on his number as the season went along. Reeves has sort of asked to kind of get away from both of those. The AR-15 thing, obviously, with the role that weapon plays in mass shootings and the
gun culture,
politics, gun culture, whatever it is, however you want to. But he doesn't want his name to be associated with those kinds of things in a way that sort of glorifies it. So he made that clear, and then he said that the Kobe thing is less fun for him given Kobe's death. It's just he doesn't like it. I also think the part that he's not saying, it is demeaning to call Austin Reeves Hillbilly Kobe. It makes
I disagree with that. I disagree.
I think it absolutely turns him into kind of a novelty sideshow.
I would agree with that if fans had started doing that after he was introduced to them. This is something that came up organically from one of his coaches,
right? But that doesn't mean that the nickname itself sort of spread around to the larger basketball population, where that's the thing he gets known for, isn't kind of condescending. Plus,
disagree. I totally disagree.
Kind of, hillbilly is
only if he considers that. I mean, we've talked before. We interviewed Billy Bob Thornton, who is from Arkansas. He proudly refers to himself as a hillbilly. These are all things, Brian, that if Austin Reeves was that either down on or I guess sort of found derogatory, he wouldn't have shared in the first place. It's not like this was something that came up through research. He shared it.
Well, I understand that, but it's also something that I think, when you're a rookie, look at Alex Caruso. You come into the league, and
that was more condescending because that was fans
much more
discovering Caruso in real time and doing the MVP.
It doesn't have to be exactly the same. It is you can disagree. I think calling him Hillbilly Kobe makes him sound like and look at this fun little goofy Arkansas guy. That isn't, like he's a novelty NBA player with his, all shucks, whatever.
The context. I mean, he
I
can shed the nickname if he wants, but I disagree with you completely with the context. I think the context matters. In most cases, I think you would be correct. In this one, I think you're wrong.
I think sharing it doesn't necessarily mean I don't know if he was.
No, I think the origin
I don't think he was. The origin is fine, but it also wasn't for mass consumption at the time because Austin Reeves wasn't for mass consumption.
No, but you don't share anything with Laker fans about Kobe and not expect it to attract attention. I mean,
I don't know. I don't think he was necessarily doing it on purpose. I don't think he said that with. You really think he said that with the idea that I'm going to make Hillbilly Kobe my nickname?
No,
that's going to be something that's going to catch on. It's going to be my marketing.
No, I don't mean it that there was anything behind it. I just mean that if he found it that insulting to begin with, he wouldn't have shared it.
I think he probably thought it was fine and cute and funny, but he doesn't want to be known in that way. And while he can say Kobe's death is part of it, I also think this is part of it as well. But anyway, the other part that I think is really interesting about it is that it's not that he doesn't want a nickname. He's not saying, I don't need one. You can just call me Austin. It's fine, because basketball fans generally are obsessed with this, and Laker fans particularly seem completely obsessed with every player must have a nickname. It's not for me, but whatever. He actually has asked everybody. He's kind of crowdsourcing this, because he says in this story from Dave McMenamin that it helps with his marketing, that it helps with his branding. He is very aware of this stuff, and I guess doesn't want to pay a professional. So he's going to do the crowdsourcing thing, which I find very smart. But what he's essentially telling Lakers fans is back to the drawing board.
I don't know if I think it's smart based on the suggestions that I've seen. I actually happen to be doing.
It's thrifty, if nothing else.
Well, it's thrifty, but the saying, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, that's true.
I was doing, was filling in on 710 ESPN last Friday, and that had come up as a show topic before us, a little bit on our show, and the majority of crowdsourcing, to be totally honest, sucked. Like, most of the nicknames that were getting tossed out there were terrible. Let me stop everybody right now. If you're trying to come up with something, Stone Cold Austin, been taken, been suggested.
That's
It's
real
lame.
stupid.
Come up with something different. Like,
I've
if
seen
it was
Keanu, that's stupid.
that makes no sense.
Arkansas, that's just dumb. That's not trying very hard. These things have to be organic.
I came up with one.
Okay.
Austin D's nuts to everybody who didn't believe in him, everybody who underestimates him, everybody who targets him because he's a goofy looking white boy on the court, so they think that they can go at him. Everybody who would automatically assume that he did not belong. D's. Austin D's nuts.
It's better than Keanu.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is.
I'll leave it at that. All right. So we got some stuff that we want to finish up through the rest of the week.
If you got suggestions, by the way, throw them out on the Locked On Lakers YouTube section, or hit us up at Cam Brothers.
I mean, he does want your help. He just wants you to do better, Lakers fans. So
I'd go to a professional if it was that important.
Maybe some of this guaranteed money that he's got now, he can do that.
I mean,
but look, he's just he's a man of humble origins, and he just wants to hold on to his cash. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to get all the stuff. Early Reminder Doer is where you go to get the pants, shopdoer.com. And we'll see everybody on Wednesday.